number of my honourable friends and others may want to take part in this debate. I've already come to the conclusion that I shan't have an opportunity to debate my own motion, but I am most grateful for having had the opportunity to take part in this one.
Good speech. Well done.
Dennis Skinner.
The honourable gentleman that just sat down was talking about, in general, the common market and the way in which the Prime Minister had played a significant part upon its developments or otherwise during the course of the past 11 years. And I wouldn't doubt for a minute that you can see where her footprints have been inside the common market. But I think the people outside have every right to understand that it's not been the one that's been painted by the populist press. Because he referred to the money that that the ex-Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Finchley, brought back from the common market negotiations just after she became Prime Minister. Well, if anybody cares to look at the amount of money that we're now paying into the common market, they begin to wonder what happened to those barrow loads of money that the ex-Prime Minister brought back. Because currently we're paying £2.5 billion. When I say we, I don't mean principally members of Parliament. I mean the people out there, those 50-odd million people in Britain, are now paying £2.5 billion per annum in order to be a member of a club called the Common Market that's been an unmitigated disaster ever since Britain went in. And let me say this as well, before anybody gets any fancy ideas. Somehow or other there are people in Britain, especially in Parliament, who join the gravy trains to the common market, who get on every junket they can possibly get on, that somehow the common market is here to stay, that the Rome Treaty is going to last forever. What a nonsense. There have been 10,000 treaties made between the nation-states in Western Europe in the course of the past, 12 or 1300 years, and where are most of them now? In the dustbin. And the same will happen to the Rome Treaty. It's based upon the free movement of capital and labour, which preceded the monetarism of this government and the one in America headed by Ronald Reagan and now by Bush. So let's dismiss for a minute at the beginning that the ex-Prime Minister was doing a great job for Britain in the common market. Not only did she not bring the money back, we've now paid £14,000 million in contributions to the common market to be a member, and you can join a miners' welfare in Derbyshire for 4 and 4pence in old money and get a better return on your cash. But every family in Britain is now paying £17 per week, every week, right throughout Britain, in order to finance the farmers in Germany, France, and the rest of the common market. That's the truth of it. What about the rest of it? She said she was against the single European market. And those of us on this side said, yes, that's a good idea. We'll vote against the single European market because it's going to give more power to the Germans and all the rest of them in the common market. So we voted against it. What did the ex-Prime Minister do? She got her troops together when she used to control them all. She got them all together and she says, we're going to stop those opposition members talking about the single European market and one or two on her own side, and we're going to have a guillotine. And she stopped the debate and forced it through. And then she's got the cheek to go on television with Brian Walden and all these other patsies and kid them on that somehow she's standing up for Britain. It's the biggest load of hypocrisy that's ever taken place while I've been a Member of Parliament. So, John Major, the new bloke, the grey man, John Major Ball, he was so ashamed of his name he dropped his ball. John Major Ball, if anybody's seen him perform here, he's been put there because the Tory party got fed up as the last Prime Minister, so they decided to knife her and turn her out like a dog in the night.
Is my honourable friend that is he aware that there has just been a major new blunder in that instead of embarking upon a new classless society, this same Prime Minister has recreated the hereditary principle in favour of Sir Dennis Thatcher?
Well, I've got the news here, as a matter of fact. It's just been announced on the wireless. That she's got an order of merit, the Deaconess of Dulwich, and he's going to be a baronet for for what's that with? I suppose it gets him in the House of Lords and £100 a day tax-free expenses and all the rest of it.
And Mark Thatcher, of course. Sir Mark Thatcher.
So notwithstanding the fact that she poses against the single European market and hands over even more power to Helmut Kohl and all the rest of them, then she says, I'm against the exchange rate mechanism. And she kids on all the people in Britain that's daft enough to listen that she's against that as well. Then what happens? A couple of her people in prominent positions in the cabinet knife her, and they tell her that if you don't accept the ERM, we're going to resign. So she brings a podium out into the middle of Downing Street behind those big Ceausescu gates that she had built for protection, and she puts the podium there and says, we are all in favour of the ERM. So she's bragging about it, and it's been that tale all along, kidding people on. And she's had the newspapers to back her by and large, especially Mr. Murdoch and his gang. They've been there, meeting her every so often, having a glass or two of whiskey on the side, so she can tell them what to put in the papers the following morning. That's the legacy of the last 11 years, and as I told them earlier in the House on an intervention, when they asked me on television what was the legacy of the Thatcher years, I said, she's been sacked and Scargill's still in office. That'll do for me. The honourable gentleman talks about re-election. He was one of those Tory MPs when I was outside Committee Room 12 asking Tory MPs how they'd voted, and he was one of those people that were very quiet about what he'd done on the second ballot. Why? Because they were after a job whichever one of the three won. So he was one of those 500 Tory MPs, that inflated number, because they were telling every pollster in sight that they were going to back whoever might win because they wanted a job and a ministerial car. So that's the honourable gentleman. I've no time to give way. Well, if you're desperate.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think in all honesty, the honourable gentleman should recognise that he never asked me on either ballot how I'd voted. And I'd like to place on record that I supported the Right Honourable Lady, that my political neighbour, the member for Finchley, on the first ballot, and the second ballot, as stated in the press before the ballot took place, I was supporting the Right Honourable Gentleman, the present Prime Minister. If the honourable member were actually to look at the press instead of indulging in these sort of fiction sheets, he would discover these things in advance.
Well, that's the third one this morning that's declared after the event. I mean, I don't understand why the honourable gentleman doesn't say to the Backbench 22 committee, look, next time we want a recorded vote. Because every vote in the House of Commons is recorded. Every time we decide to vote, whether for or against the market, whether for or against the budget, it's recorded so the people understand. And it's high time that the Tory party did what we do in the Labour Party and declared how they vote. That'd be one of the changes that they ought to have. I'll tell you something else that's characterised this last 11 years. Money. Money for the wealthy. There was a calculation done recently that in the last 11 years, the wealthiest 1% in Britain received £26.2 billion in tax cuts. The wealthiest 1%, and yet the ones that the poorest have finished up with cuts. Now, that's redistribution of wealth. Right. So the last Prime Minister knew what she was on about. She knew when she got that mandate in 1979 that what she had to do was to finance the people that financed the Tory party, to put it into the pockets of the city. That's why we've had a casino economy. People talk about the manufacturing industry, like my honourable friend, the member on the front bench. For the Wrekin, he says that the manufacturing industry has been decimated, and it has. But there's one section of the economy that's not been under attack, and that's the casino economy. You can walk down any main street of every town and city in Britain, and you'll see all the finance houses, whether represented by building societies, whether represented by estate agents. They're not selling houses, not many, not at this level of interest rates. But that represents the way in which there's been a massive shift in the economy of Britain. And when you walk down 20-odd years ago, you would see a different set of shops. Now the whole thing is changing. So the casino economy is all about allowing people to make money out of somebody else's money.
I thank the honourable gentleman. How would the honourable gentleman account then in his thesis for the fact the growth of hypermarkets, supermarkets, shopping malls, particularly in the north of England, where the spending power of ordinary people on a Saturday afternoon exceeds that of the south, and that's because of the prosperity brought about to the north of England by this government?
When the honourable lady talks about prosperity, I'd invite her to go along the Strand after 7 or 8 o'clock at night when the shops are shut and have a look in the door holes. When I came down here in 1970, I never walked along the Strand and saw cardboard boxes in rows. I never went to Waterloo Station and saw a cardboard city. When people say to me, what is the legacy of the last 11 years? Now you've got a tourist attraction down at Waterloo called Cardboard City. And that's there because there's hardly been any public sector house building in the last 11 years. When we left office, we had 112,000 public sector council houses built in that last year. Wasn't enough, in my opinion. And there were times when it was even higher than that. What is it now? It's a job to get topside 20,000 in the public sector. Is there any wonder then that the people are coming down to this city of London, coming down on the bikes, as the last cabinet member, the member for Chingford, before he took all his directorship, said, get on your bike. So they came on the bike to London and they finish up squatting, littered about in the doorways. That's the legacy of Thatcherism, because she's redistributed wealth to the wealthiest 1%, our own friends, the same people that's given her the Order of Merit, because they benefited well. The Queen doesn't pay the poll tax.
Give way.
Yes, I will give way.
I'm most grateful to the gentleman. I'm very grateful, especially as he is in mid-rant. It was in 1977, 78 and 79 that I had the occasional habit of going around with Father John Cusack and the Cyrenians on the soup runs in London. I think that he'll probably discover that the needs of people sleeping rough in London haven't really changed all that much in the last 100 years. It's important. The honourable gentleman from Wales says it wasn't a capital city. It was. It needs dealing with. Behind the Savoy, behind the Regent Palace Hotel at Waterloo, all the stops. The soup run starts at Bondway. You can go round now. So I think we ought to recognise with some humility that those problems still need dealing with. They did exist before.
Well, it stares anybody in the face. I mean, you can try and fiddle the figures, as this government does on every conceivable front, whether it's the cost of living figures, whether it's the balance of payments figures, and they'll fiddle them before the next general election, whether it's the fiddling the dole figures, whether it's fiddling the housing figures. The truth is that it's staring you in the face. And that is the legacy of the last 11 years. And it's also true in the National Health Service, where 71,000 beds have gone missing under this last Prime Minister. Right. Why? Because they've decided that it's better to look after the private system inside and outside the National Health Service. That's why there are 71,000 beds less. That's why. Instead of a waiting list of just over 500,000, you have now got a waiting list in Britain on the National Health Service of well over 1 million. That's why in the education system, after 11 years, you can see the schools crumbling. 50,000 teachers quit their profession last year because of the bad pay and the nature of the schools. That's what happens when you decide to look after the wealthy and forget the rest of the nation. And so they stand need putting their motions here about the wonderful tribute to the last Prime Minister. She knew what she was all about, and the rest of them followed, except those that got the sack. 19 ex-cabinet ministers have now got 59 directorships between them. So they're not too unhappy about the last 11 years. I'm only talking about the 19 ex-cabinet ministers. There are 200 Tory MPs that have got other moonlighting jobs. I'll tell my honourable friend while he's on the front bench, we want something in the next Labour manifesto for the next general election, and it's quite simple. It's high time that we had a Labour government that says that when it's elected to power, we'll have full-time members of Parliament with one job only. That'll send some of that lot over there scurrying for cover. Well, there might well be, but it's not me. I can't speak for some of those that are not satisfied with £26,000 a year. I actually think it's a lot of money. And I can't understand why it is that people need these extra jobs in order to make a living. When you've got more than 2 million people out of work, when you've got hundreds of thousands of young lads and lasses that have left school under Thatcher and have never had a job, that have flitted from one employment training scheme to the next slave labour scheme on £26 and £7 a week, and they haven't got a job. I'll tell you what the next Labour government should do in that respect. It ought to say in its manifesto to encourage young people to vote Labour. They should be saying that next Labour government is going to ensure that training under Labour is going to result in proper training and or education and the trade union rates of pay applicable to the job. That's what we should be saying. My honourable friend wants to get in.
But only doesn't my honourable friend think it curious that so many former cabinet ministers resigned so that they could have more time with their families and immediately took jobs which prevented them having any time with their families?
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I know that it's all about money. You see, I don't get caught up in these little cul-de-sacs. I don't believe that anything that happens in politics, in the real world, is other than about changing the system, about giving more money to one side as opposed to the other. I've not been elected to this place in order to play silly little games. I actually believe that my job is to represent my class. That's what I'm here for. And therefore, when the next Labour government comes into power, I want to see it redistribute some of that wealth. I want to see it bringing back that £26,000 million that's gone to the wealthiest 1% in order that it goes to finance the National Health Service. Yes, I will give way.
The honourable gentleman, I think we can all tolerate being shouted at and we can all tolerate party political abuse. But did I hear him correctly? Did he say that he was sent here to represent his class? Does that therefore mean, is he saying to us that those of his own constituents who he considers not of his class are not worthy of his efforts, are not worthy of his representation? Because if so, that is a disgrace.
Well, you see, the honourable gentleman doesn't know what class means. As a matter of fact, it's not about who people vote for. It's about those that are exploited and those that are being exploited by somebody else. Well, I'll explain to the honourable gentleman, since he's anxious, the whip who's supposed to be quiet. When an old lady in my constituency, who might have voted Tory, is complaining about a landlord who might have voted Labour, that the bedroom window is falling out, it's my job to represent that old lady irrespective of how she voted, because she's been exploited by the bosses. Oh, no, I didn't. You see, the honourable gentleman doesn't know the meaning of class. Class is about those that are exploited as opposed to those that do the exploiting. And the Tory party represents the wealthy exploiting class. The Labour Party traditionally should and ought to represent those that are being exploited. It's not about who people vote for. For instance, it's not my job to put more money into the banker's pocket, but it is my job. If the banker comes to me and says, I've never voted for you, Mr. Skinner, but I have to tell you, I've fallen on hard times and I've had to apply for supplementary benefit, and this lousy, rotten government has taken £5 a week off me and I can't make ends meet, then he is part of that exploited class. Oh, no, I'm quite clear about it. I've always held this view. The honourable gentleman might have heard it before he'd have been in the place long enough. So to me, I've got no problems about representing people that have got problems in my constituency.
Yeah, but isn't the honourable gentleman forgetting, and doesn't my honourable friend remember, that the former Labour Prime Minister got it right when he made a distinction between those who made money and those who earned it? For instance, is it not true that a graduate of Oxford University, who might be regarded as a certain class but may not be, even if they've got a third or fourth class chemistry degree, and they become a teacher in a school, might well be exploited? And that somebody who leaves school with 2 O-levels and goes into a bank might well be exploiting them, because this government has destroyed the teachers' negotiating machinery.
Well, my honourable friend, who used to be a teacher, knows that area well.
Yes.
And you'll find examples of exploitation in every walk of life. And it's the job of a Member of Parliament. On this side, I mean, I don't expect it on the other, they're going to represent the bosses.
That's it.
That's why it makes a nonsense of the talk that the new Prime Minister says when he refers to a classless society.
Right.
What a joke. A Tory MP that says, I want a classless society. In order to achieve that, first of all, he's got to get rid of the royal family. If you want a classless society, they've got to go. If he wants a classless society, he's got to get rid of the House of Lords. And yet they prop it up. There are 4 Tory members to every Labour member in the House of Lords. I believe in abolishing the House of Lords. So, I mean, I'm quite happy to support the Prime Minister if he wants to do it, but he ain't going to do it.
He's creating more.
Because what he's doing is trotting out generalisations that mean nothing. If he wants a classless society, he's got to get rid of all the private beds in the National Health Service. You can't have a classless society and having tax breaks for the wealthy. You can't have a classless society and have an honours list. You can't have a classless society and have privilege for people to send the kids to public schools and have the ordinary taxpayer to foot the bill for them. You can't have a tax... Yes, I will.
Really classless society, people would keep their money and be able to buy private education instead of the rotten, lousy state stuff they get in socialist-controlled inner cities. They would also be able to buy their health instead of the stuff that they're sometimes doled out in the state-controlled health service. And they would all be properly housed because we would have an effective and healthy private housing sector, which your party have been opposing ever since I can remember.
Well, the Honourable Lady has spelt it out. She knows her idea of a classless society. It's all about jumping the queue. It's all about privilege. It's all about people lining the pockets. And it's all about leaving people that are down there in the gutter to fend for themselves. She's made it clear where she stands. In a classless society, she would have trouble looking after the Wimbledon tennis touts. Because there wouldn't be any. Would they? Because everybody would have a ticket to Wimbledon. Under the classless society that she talks about, everybody would have a Henley regatta.
There'd be a queue.
When the revolution starts, under the new regime, everybody has a regatta. Everybody has a ticket. It's a joke. And it will be found out to be a joke, and it's the daftest thing that's ever come out of the mouth. I mean, he's only had the job 3 weeks, and he maybe said it in a flurry of excitement, but the truth is he can't sustain that. So I agree with my honourable friend about the legacy of those 11 years, and there are other people that are wanting to speak. Those 11 years have shown us that £3.75 billion has been lost to the education system. Those last 11 years have meant there have been 468 hospital closures. Those last 11 years have meant that the economy is up to the neck in trouble. A cabinet full of businessmen and one woman who lecture to people on this side of the House. Look, lecture to people on this side of the House that we couldn't run the economy, has now produced an economy in Britain that is the worst that we've ever had since the end of the Second World War. Not only have we got a £20 billion trade deficit of last year, and the chances are that it's going to exceed the forecast this year that's been made by the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the last autumn statement. It's going to be even worse than that. We've got a government now who reckon to know about business that have made the invisibles invisible. We've lost every single benefit that we had. They used to tell us that we could get £700 million a month on trading by the invisibles. They used to tell workers, never mind about the balance of manufactured goods. Never mind about that. They'll always make it up with the city. And now that's disappeared from view after 11 years of what they call Thatcherism. On top of that, companies in Britain today are borrowing more money in order to try and keep their heads above water than at any time for the past 50 years. Company borrowing at the present time is £60,000 million. That's the legacy of Thatcherism. Of course, it's not only that. There have been more than 120,000 bankruptcies and liquidations in these last 11 years. And all this time, they had North Sea oil. The other day it was announced that under this last 11 years, there's been more than £100 billion created for the government through taxation in North Sea oil receipts. £100 billion. That's something that the last Labour government never had. I'll tell my honourable friend, when we get into power, we've got to use that kind of money, not for the rich, not for the wealthy, not for the bosses who have had a 28% pay increase last year and a 33% pay increase the year before. The ambulance workers were told that they've got to make do with 6.5%. We've got to use that North Sea oil money in order to finance the National Health Service, in order to give the pensioners that £13 a week back that this government have robbed them of by changing the system of pensioner payments. So those are the legacies of these last 11 years. 120,000 bankruptcies and liquidations. Even the government's, even the Tory party's own Blue Rosette company has gone bankrupt. Even the company that were going to take over the GLC, the County Hall Development Group. It's an ill wind that blows nobody any good. That company's gone bankrupt as well. I must say I raised a few cheers when I heard that. That's the legacy. So the people that have been in the City of London have made money for themselves, not for the country, and now they're asking us to bail them out. The Honourable Gentleman, the Right Honourable Gentleman, member for Henley-on-Thames, he comes here the other day and he says we're in a hell of a mess. Well, I'm paraphrasing. He says, can you bail us out? He says, we've been hammering all these people with the poll tax. There's 14 million not paying. Will you in the opposition come to our aid? Some chance. There's one way of resolving that problem after the last 11 years, and that's to get rid of the poll tax, as was put forward by the Labour Party executive recently and has now become Labour Party policy. There's another thing that's worth noting. When the last Prime Minister came to power, everybody's income in this country, when calculated for credit purposes, after national insurance and income tax had been subtracted, represented 45% of take-home pay. So for every £100 that the ordinary average person had, £100 in the wage packet, after stoppages, £45 went on credit. Remember, this is a Prime Minister that told us if you elect a Labour government, they'll borrow. That was their maxim. Everybody owed £45 out of 100. Now what's happened after those 11 years? The amount of money now that's owed by credit and all forms of debt for the average income earner in Britain, take-home pay, has risen from 45% to 87%. So much for all this talk about don't borrow. The Thatcher government has been one that has been preaching don't borrow, and yet the country's awash with credit. That's the legacy. And my guess is that it's going to be a problem that's going to haunt successive governments for many a long time to come. And then there's all the talk about the shares. This property owning, share owning democracy. What were the figures when we came into power? The figures were that pensions and private institutions own 60% of the wealth in shares. 20% was owned by the government and overseas investors. 30% was owned, 10% by overseas investment and the government. 30% was owned by private individuals. After all this so-called privatisation, the figures have hardly changed, except that those that are owned by private individuals have fallen from 30% to 20%. Oh yes, there's a few more got an odd share here or there, but in terms of total percentages, the situation has got even worse. So I I suppose I'm pleased in a way that the Tories have put this motion down because it gives us a chance to put the record straight. There are people out there that have had a bellyful of Thatcherism. And there are people who have to understand that the new regime is no different. They represent the same interests, the same class interests that the honourable gentleman who got up earlier stands for. He represents the interests of the bosses and the wealthy. I represent another interest of those that are exploited. Under the new regime, now that they've shuffled the pack, it will be the same as before. There won't be any concessions to the poor. In the next budget, I'll make a challenge to him and anybody else on the front bench, the Treasury Minister. Now you're talking about consultation. Why don't you ask the Labour opposition to help formulate the next budget? If it's all right for the poll tax, let us formulate the budget. Let's have this consultation. Let us tell them what we'll do with it. Let's tell them we're going to take the £26 billion that's gone to the wealthiest 1%. Let's tell them about the other taxation. Let's tell them about VAT. Let's tell them about the rundown of the schools and the health service. Let's be able to tell them that we want to spend about another £5, £6 or £7 billion on those that have to use those services. What a great opportunity. If we're in the business of consultation, let's have it right across the board.
I'm grateful, John. We know what the Labour Party means by consultation on the budget, because I seem to remember when they were in office, they let the last 2 or 3 be written by the IMF.
Well, I was around at the time. I don't know where the honourable gentleman was. I was one of the people that didn't support it. I actually believed that the Prime Minister of the day should have said to the IMF, and I'll tell him now since he don't seem to understand, he should have gone to the IMF and he should have said, look here, we've got some North Sea oil revenues coming round the corner. We've got a lot of collateral, and we're going to use it. So don't come here telling us what to do. And if I'd have been there, I would have said to Mr. Vitavine, or whatever his name was, take your hook, we'll look after our own affairs. I'd say the same to Helmut Kohl. Now that the Tory government have got into bed with the rest of them, with the ERM and the EMU, and then the single currency, and then the Central European Bank. Oh, it applies to everybody. I would say the same to them. Helmut Kohl. Helmut Kohl's not a socialist. He's just been returned with a majority with the help of his Free Democrats for another 4 years. I know the British people don't want to be dominated by the German Bundesbank. Don't worry about that. So I'd say the same to Vitavine as I would to Helmut Kohl and all the rest. I don't take very kindly the idea that somehow this nation is not big enough to stand on its own 2 feet. I know what we need to do in order to make sure that we win those votes. I know also that what we have to do in also to ensure that we keep them for the future. And that's to make sure we keep our promises to the people that we represent, to the class that we represent, and to say that we're going to take it out of the pockets of the rich, and we're going to finance the health service. We're going to look after the pensioners. We're going to start building houses again. We're going to look after the education system. When they tell me that socialism has dropped off the end of the agenda, there are lots of things to do. And in this nation of ours, if only we cleaned up the cardboard city, that's the legacy of this government, we'd be making a start. So I'm not too bothered now the 11 years have gone. I'm a socialist. And a socialist has to be an optimist. I'm concerned about the next 11 years. I want to make sure that when we formulate our plans and put them before the British people, they're capable of getting support from the British people for 11 years for us to clean up the mess that the Tories have left and then provide benefits for our people.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. After that socialist rant, in which the honourable gentleman from Bolsover